good life, and I'm framing this around these 3 G's of gratitude, generosity, and grace. And I'm entertaining the idea, and I want us to entertain the idea, that when we learn to be grateful, that leads us to become generous people, which empowers us to live as people full of God's grace. And what I want us to do is, when we think about these things, is in the backdrop, and we're going to take a look at the story, but I want us to look at the story of the prodigal son. But I don't want us to focus so much on the son as we focus on the father, the picture of the father. And I think what we see in the father in this parable is a display of God's shining grace. That he is living out grace. He's living out not just with forgiveness, but with how he interacts and how he is present and what he does for his sons. So that's the image I want us to keep in mind. And I'm going to actually show you some pictures of some paintings of that. But I want you to think about that picture in your mind. Because when we talk about the good life, if I just say the good life, we might think of all kind of things. I know some people might think of the beach. Some people think of water. Some people might think of snow. And what are those t-shirts? You remember the t-shirts that say, they don't say the good life, they say life is good. And they're the little stick people. And what are they doing? Yeah, it's all fun. It's all leisure. It's all hobbies. And some of it's camping or biking, or I don't know if they have any of them running, do they? That's not the good life, is it? But it's all about, those leisure things. And those things are good things. There's nothing wrong with those things. But when we really think about the good life, what is the life that God calls us to? What is this abundant life that Jesus often talks about? I think we really see it in the face and in the picture of the father and the prodigal son. And there you see, I don't know how well you can see that, but you see him welcoming his son there, and you can see his face. And it's coming together. So I want to read that. We're going to start by reading that, and then today we're going to talk about how gratitude plays into this. So this is Luke chapter 15. If you want to look at it, feel free to do that. And we are going to start with verse 11. It is this, we call this the prodigal son, but the extraordinary piece is what the father does. Right? So prodigal kind of means extraordinary or extreme. Really, the father is the extreme. So Luke 15, starting in verse 11. Then Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his slaves, "Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the slaves and asked, "What's going on?" And he replied, "Your brother has come. And your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound." Then he became angry, and he refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, "Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when his son, this son of yours, came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." And the father said to him, "Son, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So the Father creates an incredible picture. I don't know how well you can see this, and if you can, I apologize. But what I hope you can see is the light on the Father's face. This is Rembrandt's painting of Return of the Prodigal. And apparently, where it actually is, it's a huge painting. It's an enormous painting. And when you get a chance, maybe after the study, if you want to come and look at it a little bit closer, you can see the son, the prodigal son, in very ratty clothes. He's missing a shoe. Over here, you can see this is the older son. He's got to put all the scenes in one painting, even though it doesn't appear like this. But we can tell that because of the red. He's father, and the older son looking with content. But the light is all on the face of the Father. That's the grace. That's that picture of grace. That incredible grace. And so what I want us to look at today is how gratitude plays a part of this. And if you read that story, you're not going to be able to see that. You wouldn't necessarily think that this is about gratitude. It's not really a lesson about gratitude. But I think as we begin to pull the pieces together, we do see that it's an incredible story of grace. And I think that grace, perhaps part of that beginning, comes, how do you become that person? And part of that is to have a heart of gratitude, to be grateful. So what we're going to do today is I want to take a look, just a little piece of this story, and I actually, instead of looking so much at the father, is I want to look at the two sons. And I think what we find with the two sons are not a picture of gratitude, but they are actually a negative image of the father. And what we find is that two people who are ungrateful, right? So they are the father, they are sons of the father, but they are in this story kind of a negative, an opposite view, the shadowy view of the father. And what we find in their personalities, I believe, are pieces that make for a life that lacks gratitude. I think that what we find are attitudes that rob gratitude. These are attitudes that they have that take this sense of gratitude away from them. So what are some of those attitudes? I think that what we find if we look at these two sons is that when we see in ourselves, or when we are people who feel that we are owed something, we become people who lack gratitude. So if we feel like the world owes us something, or people owe us something, we are losing a sense of gratitude. And I actually think we see this with both sons. The younger son, he feels the father owes him his inheritance. I want it now. I don't want to wait around. I want to get a hold of it now. He feels like it's his right. He feels like this is mine. I have it coming to me and I want it. And he gets it. And then when we come back to the end of the story and we read about the brother, we find that he feels like he's owed something, right? He said, I've worked for you like a slave. And not one time have you given me even a little bitty goat for my friends and I to celebrate. You owe me this. You don't owe it to him, you owe it to me. And I feel like when we have that, and I want to press upon this, when we are studying the Bible, it's important to find out where we find ourselves in the story, especially when we look at the negative. When do we feel like the world owes us something? Are there times that we feel that? What are some things that we do when we feel that? And is there something that we need to be careful with there, because then we are robbing ourselves of gratitude? The second, what we see, the second attitude that robs gratitude is selfishness. And very clearly, I think we see the younger son is selfish. And I'm a younger son. I'm the youngest of three. And sometimes when you're young, you're selfish. He doesn't want to live in his father's house. He doesn't want maybe to live with his older brother. Maybe he's tired of living with him. He wants to take what's his. He wants to go far away and live how he wants to live. He wants to live by his own rules. He wants to spend his money how he wants to spend his money. He wants to live his life how he wants to. And he is very selfish. I think we see that very plainly, that he becomes selfish. And when we live out of selfishness, that's an attitude that robs gratitude. I'm selfish in a lot of ways, I think. But sometimes being in the car in traffic, that's a test on my ability to not be selfish. Am I going to let people in, or am I going to step on the gas so they don't get out? All right? So when we feel like we're owed something, when we are selfish, and then third is jealousy. And we see this in the older son. The older son is jealous. And when we grow jealous of our siblings, when we grow jealous of our neighbors, when we grow jealous of anyone, that begins to tear away that sense of gratitude, right? We're so focused on what we don't have. We're so focused on what someone else has. And then we start to become jealous. The older brother says, you know what? You're doing all of this for him. You've given him everything. I don't have anything. I can't believe there's dancing. We've never danced when I'm here. He's focused on all that he doesn't have, and that's jealousy. And as a Nationals fan, who can't afford to go to a World Series game,
A little jealousy there.
some work of jealousy. You gotta work against that, right? You gotta work against that. Actually, I'd rather sit in my recliner and watch it anyway. But those are things. So we see it in the kids, right? This is it, that opposite image we see. We feel like we are owed something. Selfishness. We see jealousy. Now, think about what are other attitudes that rob us of being grateful people. All right, so when you covet what other people have, okay, absolutely, yeah. We look at something and we wish we had it too. Sure. What else? Take a look at the story, and when you get a chance, read over the story and see if you can pull something else out. And think about what are some of those negative attitudes that kind of rob us of that.
When your thoughts are only on yourself and not the big picture, and I think that's what the Father sees as the big picture.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And He doesn't see necessarily like the Son see, like you owe me this, you know, it's part of my inheritance, just give it to me, or the older son saying, well, you never did this for me. And, but can I just interject something?
Sure.
I have children, right? So I really sacrifice my life to raise my children to the best of my ability. And is it wrong for me to expect them to at least honor me, because the Bible commands them to honor me? And I kind of understand the older son. I understand that he was selfish and he didn't see the big picture like the father did. That's the difference in the personalities of the two people there. But am I not being grateful if, like I said, I dedicated my life to raise my children, to expect them to at least respect me? And that's just an example.
I think that there are expectations that are important, and if you look at that in the broad picture, the big picture of respect, I think so. I think it comes then to what do you mean by respect, and is that, there. I mean, I don't know the situation, but if it's something very specific that you feel like they have to do, and that's just not who they are, then that could be a different story. You know what I mean?
Because I gotta understand the older son.
Oh, we all understand him, don't we? We all understand the older son. This is why this is a radical story, because we're one of the two brothers, all of us, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we're both of them, right? And we're not usually this.
Right.
But that's what we're getting to.
Okay.
We're trying to, because this is God. That's Jesus is telling this parable to point us to God, but we are to be like, we are to work to be like God, to do this. So, yeah, I mean, that's it. But I think what we're going to be able to look at is some things that maybe will help us break through on some of those things. So we've taken a look at what kind of defeats gratitude. And so now I'm going to talk about a couple of things that help us then grow into be grateful people. Because this is gratitude is something that is not just a feeling, but is an ethic. And in fact, that's exactly what Diana Butler Bass writes about in her book. So Diana Butler Bass writes this book, Grateful, and this is incredible work. And I was introduced to this when I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and some of those things were really meaningful and grateful. So she talks about in the book that yes, gratitude is an emotion, but she says when you read books about gratitude, all they do is talking about emotion. They talk about the emotion. She said it's also an ethic. So let me break that down. This is a quote that gives us the big picture. Gratitude unlocks the fullness of life. It makes sense of our past, brings peace for today, and creates a vision for tomorrow. And we're going to see how all of this kind of fits together. But when we think of gratitude as these two pieces, right? So gratitude is an emotion and an ethic. And so we'll talk about what does an ethic mean. But when we talk about emotion, we know it's there. Gratitude is something we feel, right? So you feel gratitude. If someone gives you an amazing gift, you can't help but feel, well, usually when you recognize what a great gift it is, you feel very thankful. And that is an emotion that just comes, right? And there are some people that it comes a lot easier than other people. But it just comes. And so it is an emotion. Like love is an emotion, right? But there's more to love than just more fuzzies too, right? So gratitude is an emotion, it is a feeling. And it is a feeling that can be generated by other feelings. It's a feeling that can be contagious. And so when we get together in the church and we sing songs of praise, when you begin to sing together, sometimes you start to feel the praise, right? You feel the thanksgiving. You get caught up in the emotion of it, and that's good. That's a good thing. You get caught up in the emotion when you begin worship by asking for thanks, right? So there's an intentionality by what we do with worship. And whether you get up and say something, the whole purpose of our worship time is to say, we want you to be thinking about what you are thankful for. And when we do that, when people share that, don't you feel it sometimes? Don't you feel how when the people get up and share things, it can turn that sanctuary? Because that feeling is there. Maybe even in the silence when we're really all thinking about it, maybe that turns something inside us too. So the feelings can be contagious. There's something that we feel. Yes, gratitude is that. Gratitude is certainly that. But if we only think of it as an emotion, emotions and feelings flee sometimes. And they're tricky, right?
They're dependent on circumstances and situations.
Exactly. If I don't feel good, if I'm not feeling good, then I might not have that emotion of gratitude, right? If it's raining outside, that might change my feelings, right? If tonight doesn't work out how I want it to, I'm not going to say the word. If the game doesn't turn out how I want it to, I might have a different mood tomorrow than if it turns out how I want it to, right? And so there is a lot of that. So we accepted it as a feeling, but then maybe what we discover is there's more to gratitude than just feeling. And what Diana Butler Bass says is that gratitude is, however, more than just an emotion. It is a disposition that can be chosen and cultivate an outlook toward life that manifests itself in actions. It is an ethic. An ethic. It's an emotion and an ethic. And so if it is an ethic, then it's something we choose. It's something we can cultivate, she says. We can till the soul of ourselves to grow the seed of gratitude. It needs to be worked. And there are ways that we can work then to cultivate and grow gratitude. Yeah, it's a feeling sometimes, But it's not just a fleeting feeling, it's something that can grow. So how do we do that? Well, that's a big question. That's a big one. So, we're gonna get, this is, can you read those slides? Because the light gets you. It's okay if you don't, if you can't. How do you cultivate and act upon gratitude? All right, so we're going to discuss 3 pieces here. And the first is awareness. So how do we then become aware of opportunities to be grateful or times when we're not being grateful? And so Diana Butler-Bass talks about cues. What are times in our lives when there are cues to say, hey, can we be grateful? Or what are we grateful for? So in your daily life, what are some moments that might be cues to remind us to be grateful? Meals. All right. You say a blessing at the meal. Why not in that moment think about what you're thankful for, right? What else?
Having a place to stay.
A place to stay, right? So when you wake up, is that an opportunity to say, I should be thankful, right? How about when you go to bed? Anybody fall asleep saying their prayers?
Yes.
That's a great way to fall asleep. It's a great way to fall asleep. I don't think God is offended by that at all. I think He says, that is wonderful. God says, great, they are bringing it to me right into the very, that's a great time to be thankful. And so we look for cues, moments that we can remember to be grateful. And you develop those. You find those cues in your life. If you journal, if you take your quiet time, maybe you put aside a time to say, all right, let me think about where and when I'm grateful. And those then become cues. And then I have added in with cues is recognition. And recognition is learning to recognize the moments when we have been grateful and when we have not. And starting to ask ourselves why. Maybe we didn't feel good, or maybe something was hard in that moment. Maybe there's something that reminded us of something very painful. Sometimes we are the younger brother or the older brother, and if we can recognize those moments, we can begin to grow from them. What are the times that you have a hard time being grateful? And start to recognize those. So once you have the cues and once you're aware, you begin to create this awareness, this space for awareness, then we move to practice. And practice begins with techniques. And some of you, I know, have not liked the techniques of being thankful. How many of you were forced to write thank you cards and you didn't like it? That's okay. That's all right. How many of you were told by your parents that you better say thank you? Please and thank you. Right? Does saying thank you because your parents force you to say thank you make you thankful? Does that mean you're grateful? No, it doesn't. But it is a technique
God tells us to be
that
thankful.
can.
The Bible, in everything, even in the
Yes.
So it's kind of a command too. It's not, right? I mean, to be thankful in all things.
And we learn by doing. Children learn by doing.
Right,
So-
exactly. So what I'm getting at is that some of the tendency is to say, I'm not going to do this because I'm not really grateful and it's fake. And I don't want to do that. Well, if it is fake, then maybe you're right. But see it as a technique that will develop you into a grateful person. That's what I think.
It's like riding in the car when it's raining, and you recognize that you could be walking in the rain instead of riding
Right,
in the rain, and so
Right.
you become grateful for mode of transportation.
right, exactly.
Well, you don't wanna go to church, but you know you should, so you get up and go, because, not necessarily because you want to at that point, but because you know you're supposed to, you know God wants you to.
Exactly.
And that's the bottom line, is we try to please God, so trying to find something bad to be thankful for is very difficult. I think it's easier the older you get and the more bad that happens to you, and then you see what God has done.
Experience.
Yes, you
Experience.
okay, I know there's some good when it comes, because he's done it every other time, so there's no reason to think he's not gonna do it now. I'm going to say, wait, no.
Right.
But,
And I think that the techniques, then doing the things that show gratitude, whether you see it as a practice and a discipline to help create that attitude within you. So, my generation was, we're not gonna force people to do things that aren't true. Well, maybe we should have a little bit more, so.
The other thing, I was thinking about the prodigal son, the youngest one. Now, his desire was to take whatever he had and go. But when he came back, while he was out there, he realized that he took his money, he didn't know how to save it. There were a lot of lessons that he had to learn that he didn't know. And had he just stayed home with his father, maybe he would have learned how to save his money, use it when he needed it. So while he was out there, he misused it. He ended up having to live with people or get food from, looking for food to eat. And all of that came about because he was not thankful while he was at home.
Right.
But when he came back home, he was grateful there to be home. Because he knew then that the purpose that his father had for him, that was something to be thankful for. The money that he would have had, that he doesn't have now, was something to be thankful for. Had he let his father give it to him when he got a certain age. But we are like that too. Sometimes we think that we need everything right now. And then when we realize we don't know how to use it, we don't know what to do with it. And then we get a certain age and we say, oh, if I had that now, I would do differently. And then you become grateful, you're happier that and sometimes when your parents don't give it to you, you say, oh, Mom, I'm glad you didn't give it to me, or Dad, I'm glad you didn't give it to me. Because now you're happier, because they didn't listen to you, they didn't give you everything. But I like that father because he was happy to have him come back home. Sometimes some parents don't want him to come back home.
Right.
The father was glad to have him come back home and welcome him back home and gave him the best of everything, as if he had not done anything.
Right.
And we're thinking of that's how God looked at us.
Right. Right. So we're and we're going to turn to that when we start talking about past, present, and future. But I want to hit on this, to continue with the practices, the techniques. Then, if we do the techniques, then they turn into automatic practices. So write those thank you cards. Sit down and say, these are the people I'm thankful for, and write them. Look at the waiter in the eye and say thank you when they bring you a refill. Every time. Do those kind of things that then helps you cultivate a culture of being thankful, then that turns into action.
But this is a little bit like, okay, your parents told you, you gotta say thank you. And you're telling us, you gotta say thank you. I understand that, but, because it brings up something that happened today. We should look that waiter in the eye and say thank you, but what I realize now is mean it.
Yes.
Understand, what happened today, trivial. Somebody held a door open for me, and as I went in, I said thank you. Realized now it was just an automatic thank you, and I wasn't thinking, well, you did something nice, and really, maybe say appreciate it. So it's not only do it, but think and appreciate what they actually.
Right. And I guess the theory is that if we do the practice, it is going to shape us into doing that in bigger parts of our lives. And so, but not always. So we do have to then recognize, right? Well, that was automatic, so let me think about how I can then be thankful for those kind of things. Yeah, I think you're on to something. So when we begin to develop practices and when these things begin to move in this way, then it really starts to transform the essence of our lives into past, when we think about past, present, and future. And so what we begin to see is that the way that we begin to look at our lives, if we have this culture and have cultivated this sense of gratitude, it can reshape how we even see our lives and things that happen. So, scientists and studies have shown that negative memories generate negative moods. Right? And we know that. And positive memories generate positive moods. Now, that doesn't mean that we go and rewrite our past. But what it does say to us is, can we begin to look at our past a little bit like you were saying, in the sense of gratitude, and begin to identify what is good that has come from even some of the bad things that have happened to us. So Diana Butler Bass shares a story that she was out in California and she was teaching at Santa Barbara. She was a professor and she loved it. She was pouring herself into her work. And her supervisor came up to her and said, "We're sorry, we're going to have to let you go." And she said, "I'm doing work. Yes, you're doing great work, but you just don't fit here." And she said she was devastated. And it wasn't until many years later, when she looked back at it through the guidance of a friend, that she began to see the blessings that happened, that she began to find out that she loved writing, that she began to find out that she would find her husband, that she would find all of these things, and later she can look back and say that very terrible moment is something that I'm actually thankful for because of how it shaped and created space for different parts of our lives. And I think that if we can begin to cultivate gratitude in our everyday lives, it will help us look into our past and be able to, not everything, and we don't need to look with rose-colored glasses, unless we're on the bench for the Nationals. But we don't want to make things up. And you know what? There are some traumas in our past that are terrible, awful things, and maybe the only thing that we're grateful for is that we're no longer in that. But then we start to shape, gratitude begins to start to shape in a truthful way how we understand our past. And we begin to see God's working and blessings in that. And when that happens, then that starts to widening our vision for the present. We're able to then see the bigger picture of what is happening in the present life. And then that gives us hope into the future. Because we know God has been with us. We know God is with us now. We know that there is incredible opportunities in the future because God is there. Right? So let's think about the story again real quick. And you were getting it before me, which is great. That's great. That means that I'm not making this stuff up on my own. But the Father is grateful that the Son returns. He is thankful that He's back. He is elated. He is waiting for Him to come back while He is still far off. And because He has a sense of gratitude for that return, doesn't that mean that he is then, in that moment, allowed to let go of the pain of the past? And that he will not make him pay for the pain of the past. Because he is thankful that his son is back. Because he has the realization of he was lost and is now found. He was dead and he's come back to life. And then that broadens that present moment to be a celebration. We're going to throw a party now. What we need to do is not ridicule and punish. He's learned his lesson, right? Parents, we want to sometimes, yeah, but we got to get you for what you did to us. He sees beyond that because of his gratitude. He then says this is a time to celebrate, not to punish. All of it's going to work out. And then that gives the father the wherewithal and the ability to recognize that the older son is not there, and the courage to go out and find the older son and say, come join the party. Come do it. This father goes to both sons. He goes out to meet the one that is coming back, and he leaves the party to find the one that's not there. Gratitude, in a sense, creates that grace that's right there, creates that. So what we're going to look at is gratitude, then moves us to generosity. We certainly see generosity from what he does for his son. And then generosity gives us the ability to be that person of grace. All right? So we've got 4 minutes. I want to touch just some random other scripture verses that are witnesses to this, that we do see God saying for us, telling us to be grateful at all times. We're not going to read all of them, but somebody, if you would, find Habakkuk 3, 17 through 19. Can you find? Huh? Do you need my phone? Oh, okay. Habakkuk 3, 17 through 19.
Though the fig tree does not bud, and there is no grapes on the vine, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen, and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Savior. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of deer. He enables me to tread on the heights. For the director of music on my string instruments.
All right. So in that moment, they had a realization of how bad things were, but they were going to praise God because they knew that God was their strength. That God would give them those hind legs of a deer, right? I meant to put that picture in there that I took while I was in Israel of shooting up those hind legs. So that is gratitude in all circumstances. And that's exactly what we read in 1 Thessalonians 5:18. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Do not quench the Spirit. Sometimes when we're not grateful, we are choking the Spirit out. Don't do that. What does Job say? You know the passage in Job. What does he say?
Though he slay me, I will trust him. Though he slay me, I will trust him.
Yeah, and he says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That Philippians passage that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. What is he saying? He's saying that whether I am in need or in want, God is taking care of me. God is my strength. We can go back to even Paul's witness there. I mean, so many times in 2 Corinthians, but in 2 Corinthians when he is talking about his own struggle, right? With the thorn in the flesh. I asked God to take it away and it did not go. But God said,
My grace is sufficient.
power is made perfect in weakness. When I am weak, then I am strong. Yeah, therefore I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ. For wherever I am weak, then I am strong. So the witness of Scripture continues to talk about that gratitude in all circumstances. So continue to read through that. All right? Questions, comments?
Can I just piggyback on